Hi, good evening everyone. The session will begin soon. As a gentle reminder, we kindly ask that you switch your mobile phones to silent mode. This session will be recorded for informational, educational, and marketing purposes, and the recording will be hosted on YouTube and our website for your viewing. A write-up and related materials may be made available together with the recording. Do take note that the copyright of these materials shall belong to NTU. Welcome to our public lecture in the Dean's Distinguished Speaker Series. I'm Eden, a final year marketing student at Nanyang Business School, and I'm honored to be your MC for tonight. It's absolutely wonderful to see all of you here tonight in person and to those joining us online across the world. Thank you for being part of this session. In tonight's session, we'll explore how organizations can identify, develop, and retain high-impact performers using rigorous data and research insights. You'll gain a practical understanding of what distinguishes star performance, how leadership and systems influence sustained contribution, and how people analytics can be applied responsibly with fairness and governance in mind. Also, a special thanks to everyone who have submitted your questions in advance. The speaker and moderator will address as many as possible in the session. Now, it is my privilege to invite Associate Professor Marilyn Angwei, Head, Division of Strategy, International Business and Entrepreneurship, for her opening remarks. Professor Wee.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to see so many of you here, and I also would like to welcome those who are joining us online. In strategy, we often return to a fundamental question. Why do some firms consistently outperform others? A significant part of the answer lies in people. Across industries, a relatively small number of individuals generate disproportionate impact. They shape innovation, influence culture, and drive outcomes that far exceed what traditional performance systems would predict. Yet, many organizations continue to make talent decisions based on instinct and inherited assumptions. We speak of averages. We assume performance follows a neat bell curve, and we rely on intuition to judge potential. But evidence suggests otherwise. A small proportion of individuals account for a substantial share of value creation, and yet these high-impact contributors are not always well understood or well supported by the systems around them. In today's environment, with tighter labor markets, rising expectations of fairness and transparency, and the growing use of AI in evaluating work, talent decisions are no longer administrative. They are strategic. And that is the focus of tonight's public lecture. I've known and worked with Professor Herman Aguinis since my doctoral training, and even as a PhD student, I've seen how he does not simply develop a paper, he develops the scholar or scholars behind it. He brings rigor, discipline, and a strong work ethic to his scholarship, and that example has shaped how I appreciate and approach my own work and how I mentor my students today. This evening, he will draw on decades of research to examine how organizations can more reliably identify, develop, and retain high-impact performers, and how leadership and organizational design influence sustained contribution while maintaining fairness and sound governance. And we are also very fortunate to have here with us our very own alumna, Ms Jovin Ong, Executive Director of Human Resources at 8M Real Estate, who has nearly 2 decades of experience translating business priorities into people and cultural strategies. And she brings with her a practitioner's perspective that will connect tonight's research insights with organizational realities. And with that, let me invite Ms. Jovin Ong to begin the session and formally introduce Professor Aguinis. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome Professor Herman Aguinis to my alma mater, Nanyang Business School. Professor Aguinis is the Avram Taka Distinguished Scholar and Professor of Management at the George Washington University School of Business, where he also chairs the Department of Management and Director of the Master of Human Resources Management Program. He's widely known for his research on performance management and evidence-based talent management practices. In fact, what was really amazing is that he's ranked among the world's top 1% most impactful researchers in economics and business for 8 consecutive years. He's also very well traveled, having held appointments at universities in China, Malaysia, Singapore, Argentina, France, Spain, so many countries that I couldn't even finish naming. Today's discussion is grounded in Professor Aguinis' work on managing star performance. His research suggests that organizational performance doesn't follow the normal distribution, but rather the power law distribution. This insight raises important questions for how organizations define performance, design talent systems, and balance effectiveness with fairness and sustainability. As a HR practitioner myself, I am really looking forward to hearing Prof. Aguinis' lecture and also learning how these ideas can be applied in different organizational contexts. I myself came from both public as well as private sectors and also have exposure in startup environments. So understanding how all this can be applied to various contexts will be very, very helpful for me. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you. Thank you. So good to be back here in Singapore and NTU. We saw the video in which some people were featured. Been here for 30 years, for 27 years. Well, guess what? This is me here 25 years ago. Right? So I am a member of the family, right? Yeah? The young man over there, I think that, I don't know if the Merlion is still there in that location, but look at the skyline, all right? Do you recognize that? That's 25 years ago, right? That's like 15% of the buildings we have now. Quite amazing. So I arrived yesterday in Singapore. Somebody asked, are you jet lagged? I go, what jet lagged? We don't talk about that. What is the first thing I did after I landed? Singapore noodles, that first meal. Okay, so I'm very, very happy to be back here at NTU. Today we will talk about what do we learn from our research journey about performance, talent management, star performers that can help us enhance firm performance and the competitiveness of firms, how to recruit, produce, and lead star performers. I was born in Argentina when I was a very, very young boy. I was 5 years old or so. I remember the 1974 World Cup in Germany, in Munich. And do we have any soccer fans, football fans here? Okay. So this is historical for you guys. But I remember collecting football cards. And I saw that if I had the card for a specific player and I wanted to trade it, and if I wanted to trade it for a good player, I needed 20 or 30 cards to trade that card for the one for the good player. And I thought, wow, there are some cards that are so much more valuable than others. And then at the end of that World Cup, I went back recently and I looked at the statistics, and you see that there was one player who scored 7 goals. Only 2 players scored 5 goals, 3 players 4 goals, and 170 players scored 0 goals of the 16 teams. And 5 of the 6 top scorers were in the 3 best teams. And I had that in the back of my mind for a good 25 years or 30 years. And then I realized in other sports, do you know him? Raise your hand if you know him, all right? So the last time I looked into this, I don't know if this has changed, but he's the first and only Olympic gold medalist from Singapore. Okay. How about Feng Tiawen? Do you know her? All right. 3-time Olympic medalist, silver and bronze, Beijing 2008. Former world top 5 ranked player. This is not only in sports. In the IT sector, a good programmer is 100 times better than the average programmer. Did you read in the last few months how they're poaching AI engineers from each other, paying $100 million packages? $100 million. These are called acqui-hires. Have you heard the term acqui-hires? Instead of an acquisition, you hire a team of stars called acqui-hire. They come up with these wonderful terms. I wish we could do that. Let us. But the reason is that someone who's really good, a really good programmer, is 100 times better. Not just in sports. Mark Andreessen. Jack Welch, former CEO of GE, the company that has returned more money for shareholders than any company. Jack Welch is a CEO who has trained more Fortune 500 CEOs than any other CEO. So he has produced stars. Very simply, the team with the best players wins, which is what I saw in the 1974 World Cup. So we've been doing research in this area for a good 15 to 20 years. By now, we have data on more than 900,000 people, actors, actresses, movie directors, fundraisers for political teams, fiction and nonfiction writers, musicians, elected officials in the US. How many times a senator is elected and re-elected versus elected once and then not re-elected? In Australia and Canada, we looked at data on athletes. By the way, if you have your phone, if you click on the QR on the left, you can download the articles. But for those of you who are not academics, if you click on the right QR, you can download and watch more than 500 videos and podcasts, many of them created with AI, that offer a very user-friendly description of a bunch of our research studies. And by the way, if you're a professor, an instructor, you can use those for teaching. Undergrads, MBAs, even executives, because they translate some very, I would say, sometimes boring statistical studies into a language and a way that people can relate to. So we've done a lot of research. We're using very, very large data sets. We found that the best are much better than the rest. And this happens in so many industries. And if we have division heads or deans in business schools, you know, because you have the data on the faculty, that there are a few faculty who publish much, much more than most faculty. And if faculty more times than most faculty. And you see the same thing with how many people get Emmys and Emmy nominations, and how many legislators are elected and re-elected many, many times versus most who just get elected once or twice and then never again. NBA players. How many players, basketball players, score how many points? But this is not just about individual performance. Star performers are those who help their team win, those who help their company win. It's the tide that raises whole ships. Those are the stars. Not only because of their individual statistics, because they help elevate the game of everyone else around them. We see that in the biotechnology ventures. We see that do we have anyone from the pharmaceutical industry? Biotech, entrepreneurs, IT, startups, okay? A paper just published in Entrepreneurship Research and Practice shows that 88% of the performance distribution are right skewed, meaning a small minority of entrepreneurs are extremely successful and the vast majority are not nearly as successful. What star performers do, like I gave the analogy of the tide that raises all ships, star performers increase the size of the pie for everyone. So certainly they get paid more. If you see that in sports. In sports it's very obvious because the compensation is public, but the performance is also public. So Messi, Ronaldo, they get paid a tremendous amount of money, much more than other players. But we also know that their performance is vastly superior. And these athletes get traded to another team, and then that new team then wins a championship over time, just like that. Just like that. So it is not only their individual stats, but they help their companies and teams win. Look at some of these athletes here in Singapore. Ramsalar, do you know of him? Yeah? He makes 1.6 million euros. You think, wow, that's so much more money than the typical player. But look what he's done. He joined in 2024, and then the team starts to win. Not only that, but he creates opportunities for other people. He provided 7 assists. Passes the ball, someone else scores. So it's not just their individual statistics, but he helps the team win more games and win the championship. So this is what's going on. If you look at the typical bell curve, the bell-shaped distribution in the center, we have a peak in the center and pretty much the same number of scores to the left and to the right, and a slope coming down. The mean is in the center. That is what we call a normal or bell-shaped distribution. And then you have the skewed distribution where you have a right tail that is very long. And the right tail that is very long, you have the mean that is pulled to the right. And if you look at that skewed distribution, you see a small minority of performers all the way to the right who score much, much higher than the majority of people. Okay? And if you think of the world as skewed in terms of the distribution, the way you look at individual performance changes quite drastically. And the view of the bell curve, which has been used for so many years, for so many performance management systems. In fact, some of us who were at Indiana University before we came here know that for grading some of the classes, there was a bell curve that was imposed on the grading, that professors had to grade students based on the bell curve. And but that's not how reality works. Because if you have a highly, highly competitive system where you only admit, let's say, 5% or 10% of the applicants into the MBA program, you should not see a bell curve. So let me play real quick this video. This is an interview. In the U.S., there's a public radio station called National Public Radio. And this has 20 million listeners, okay? Interestingly, I had a neighbor who never ever said hello to me. But after this was played on the radio, she was super friendly because now I was famous. So she was very famous, very, very happy to know me, that she was my neighbor. Let me see if this works.
Our beliefs about the bell curve. So he's looked at the performance of more than 600,000 people in 4 broad areas of human performance. And here's what he's found.
We looked at researchers, we looked at entertainers, we looked at politicians, and we looked at collegiate as well as professional athletes. In each of these kinds of industries, we found that a small minority of superstar performers contribute a disproportionate amount of the output.
So what Aguinis is saying is that the performance of the people across these different fields did not fit the bell curve. He didn't find a few incompetent people, a few superstars, and lots of people in the middle. Rather, what he found was that most people are actually below average, and a small but fairly sizable number of superstars accounts for most of the performance, whether you're talking about home runs or academic papers or Oscar nominations.
I mean, we seem to be talking about a lot of fields here, I mean, across life, and you're saying that in general, most of us are below average. That's a bit disturbing in a way.
Well, it's not my conclusion. It's a conclusion that disturbs me as well, but it is what Aguinis is finding. So if you look at the universe of, say, 3,000 Grammy nominations, what you'd expect to see is that a few people would receive 1 or 2 nominations, lots of people would receive 3 or 4 nominations, and fewer than 5 would receive more than 10 nominations. Instead, what Aguinis is finding is that most people receive only 1 Grammy nomination, and a small but fairly sizable number, 64 people, receive more than 10 nominations.
Well, Shankar, before we throw out years of research, I mean, I have to ask, the bell curve certainly came from something. I mean, all the times performance was measured in schools and workplaces. I mean, what happens to all of that research?
So what Aguinis is basically saying is that much of the time what we're doing is we are not measuring human performance as much as we're constraining it. So when we force people into the bell curve, what this does is it eliminates the performance of people who are the superstars. And he says this is a crazy idea because the bell curve came to us from this 19th century idea of how a factory assembly line is supposed to work. Here's what he told me.
If you had a superstar performer working at your factory, well, that person could not do a better job than the assembly line would allow. But if you unconstrain the situation and allow people to perform as best as they can, you will see the emergence of a small minority of superstars who contribute a disproportionate amount of the output.
What Aguinis is saying is that when you're working an assembly line, you can make only so many widgets in an hour because that's how fast the assembly line is moving. But today, most people are not working in an assembly line, and so there is theoretically no limit on the number of academic papers you can write, or the number of home runs you can hit, or the number of Grammy nominations you can receive.
So in this current world, if we're not talking all the time about an assembly line, I mean, would he say that we should just be focusing on the superstars and what they're able to do?
You know, it depends if productivity is your only goal. So if you think about education, for example, it would be absurd to say that we should only focus on the superstars and kick everybody else out of school, because the goals of education are not just to win Nobel Prizes. But he says if your goal is to win Nobel Prizes or Grammy nominations, then yes, you're disproportionately likely to get most of those victories from a fairly small number of superstars.
Shankar, thanks for sharing this research with us.
Thank you, David.
Shankar Vedantam, who regularly joins us to share interesting research on topical issues. You can follow him on Twitter at Hidden Brain, and you can follow this program at NPR Green and at Morning Edition.
So that interview, you heard me talk for, I don't know, 9 seconds combined. It was a 45-minute interview. But the nice thing is that he pretty much said everything that I said to him. So, by the way, there's an issue of the research practice gap, which is that many researchers are frustrated that practitioners, managers, policymakers do not use our research, and on the other hand, policymakers and practitioners are frustrated that the research we create is not useful to them. So there's a problem of communication on the one hand, but it's not just things lost in translation. Problem is that many times we do research that needs to be theory-oriented to be publishable in our top journals, but doesn't necessarily lead to practical advice. So sometimes we do research that is more trying to solve a problem, or we discover something that we don't really know why yet. And where's George? George, we're talking about some of these issues during the reception, that he has this wonderful database, he's dealing with very, very important issues, but doesn't have quite the theoretical flavor of a typical journal article. And in one of our first papers that we published on this issue, which was published in 2012, it was rejected by some of the major journals because we didn't have a theory about it. We were essentially debunking this myth of the bell curve that has been around for decades and that many even companies use to rate employee performance. And we're showing that is not true. But we didn't know yet why. But then the paper was published, and then it was featured by NPR, and it had a tremendous impact. So we have to be persistent and patient, because if we study a really important topic, eventually it will be published. And then other papers after this one were published in really good journals in addition to personnel psychology. But this is just 3 examples out of hundreds that we have in our database of almost 1 million workers by now. We looked at how many people get a Grammy nomination over and over again, and based on the number of people in the population, what's the average and how many you should expect to get. And we see that a few people get many more Grammy nominations than everyone else. Number of articles published. This is something that most of us academics know, that a few minority of researchers publish many more papers than others. And that's not just in the productivity of researchers. If you think about Da Vinci and Michelangelo and Bach, artists, painters, sculptors, the vast amount of works they have produced, much more than the majority of people in that industry. And the nice thing about this topic is that all managers know that's true, that there are a few people who produce much more than others. Now remember, when I started giving talks about this topic to practitioners, to managers, consulting firms, and researchers, the researchers were up in arms and they didn't believe the findings. And because like Max Planck said, all theories never die. You need to wait until the creators of the theories die, and then the new theory can be put forward. But the practitioners were like, yeah, what's new? I know that. It was obvious for the majority of managers who manage people that that's a reality, but we were very pleased that Laszlo Bock, who was the director of HR, or they call it people operations, Google is not called HR, it's called people operations, wrote a book on how to manage people at Google, how they do it, and it's incredible. I mean, he reproduced a table from our personnel psychology article. He has a whole chapter on how Google pays people unfairly, meaning that 2 people in the same job with the same title get vastly different salaries based on their performance, and relying on our research. So we're very happy about that. And in Capital One as well, it's a bank that is in Washington, D.C., based in Virginia. And we were very, very pleased when the head of people analytics was asked, what are some of the research findings that you find useful for your own research? And he talked about our work on star performers. And he's showing that he talked about how our research shows that stars produce 10 times more than the typical worker in terms of value. So our journey has been very long and not easy, and many frustrations and many rejections and many disappointments from researchers who say, I don't believe your data. And eventually we were able to, I think, put this topic on the mainstream agenda. And we, meaning a lot of my students and I and other researchers, because research is not something you do by yourself, were able to look at different aspects of star performers, starting with the first paper in 2012, which empirically showed that in most jobs, in most occupations, when you don't have constraints, you see this distribution of performance with the right tail to the right tail, showing that a few minority produce much more than everyone else. And then we started to think theoretically, why is that happening? When it might not happen? So we started to see that in some industries there were fewer stars, and in those industries we had what we call insulators of stars. And we found in fact in a follow-up research that that women face more insulators than men in certain occupations, in STEM fields. And we found that some things that companies do accelerate the production of stars. In other companies, the things they do slow down the production of stars. We also found that there's a distribution of CEO performance that is not normal. And the distribution of pay for CEOs is not normal. But there's almost no overlap between the two distributions, meaning that the top performing CEOs are not the top compensated CEOs. And we try to find why. And we found that some CEOs are very sneaky, for example, in how they make announcements about company performance. Before the compensation committee will meet, they talk about good things. And then the compensation committee meets and they say, oh, well, it's going to give them a pay raise. So all kinds of issues in terms of the distribution, when it's more skewed, when it's less skewed, what happens with gender issues. And then also we looked at the financial value. At one point, hiring many more performers doesn't really increase the financial value because they're very expensive. Top performers are very expensive. So at what point and how many do you hire so that you still get value from them increasingly? And in the 2023 paper in Organization Science, we looked at teams, because up to that point, we were looking at individuals. And we found the same pattern for teams, that we also find a minority of teams. And so we were not surprised when we see this, talent war going on for teams. The concept of acqui-hires essentially is to hire an entire team. They hire an entire team. We also looked at the gender gap, the JOB paper in 2024 with my student Isa Villamor, who's now at IESE in Madrid as a professor there. We found that people hold implicit views about what it takes to be a star performer. And we found that when we asked people, tell me what are the attributes of the typical employee? What are the attributes of the typical star performer? What are the attributes of the typical male performer versus female performer? The typical attributes of the star are more closely associated with the typical attributes of the male performer than the female performer. So that's one of the insulators that women have to fight to be able to be stars, become stars. So what did we learn? I mean, in terms of how many practitioners do we have here? Consultants, managers, raise your hand. Okay? A few. So what we learned, but this is also for division heads and for deans. So what happens right now with AI, with job complexity, and the reduction of situational constraints, flexible hierarchies, more autonomy, is that the employees who are more motivated, the employees who want to work more hours, the employees who seek out, for example, some employees will go out there and try to learn AI. Some professors, some students will try to go and learn AI on their own, even if there's no training program in AI. Okay, those people who are more motivated, more entrepreneurial, it will be easier for them to become star performers because there are fewer constraints in the environment. So technological innovation accelerates the production of stars and increases the variance in performance between the top performers and the average performers. If you have situational constraints, for example, if you work at the assembly line moves at a certain speed. So even if you want to be a star, or you have the abilities to be a star, you may not be a star because you can only be as good as the speed of the assembly line. But if you work in the knowledge economy, in the financial sector, in the research sector, in pharmaceuticals, in biotechnology, there's no such constraint to your performance. The other thing we learn is that when a star leaves or joins, that has extraordinary consequences. Extraordinary consequences. Both positive and negative. If you lose a star, it's catastrophic. If you hire a star, it's an incredible thing. Okay? I have two sisters and a brother. My brother works in commercial real estate, mall development, mall building. He says, when I build a mall, I get my anchor. I get my main store, and then all the other stores come. So if you're hiring, you get your anchor. You get your scholar. You get your top heavy hitter in finance, in marketing, in management, in one of the areas, and then people come. The others will come. The relation between performance and value is nonlinear. Okay? 30% of value comes from the top 10%. About 50% of value comes from the top 25%. And that could be financial returns, could be real estate. I'll be curious to hear if you think about your I don't know if you have real estate realtors. I don't know how you work when you were managing the hotels. I worked a lot with Marriott and other hotels. How many properties produce how much of the revenue? Small minority of properties produce the majority of the revenue. Okay? Performance-based pay dispersion leads to increased star performer retention. The stars do not want a system where everybody gets paid the same. They want to get paid for producing more results. That's what Google calls we pay unfairly. Two people in the same job, one person can make 10, 20, 30 times more than this other person with the same job title working in the cubicle next to them. Okay? Now, to do that, it is critical that you measure performance well. Otherwise, you don't know how to pay. Several implications for leadership. In 2019, a year before the pandemic, I wanted to get a lot of these concepts out there in a way that everybody would understand. The dummies title is for the author, not for the readers. But if you click on that QR, you can get that book. It's very inexpensive. And essentially shows how to manage performance for teams and for individuals. So what should you do to become a better leader and use talent, like Professor Wee said, to improve how your firm will improve its performance? How can you use talent as a source of competitive advantage, sustainable competitive advantage? Number one, remove situational constraints, ceiling constraints. Okay? So, for example, if you have an employee who's supervised by a mediocre supervisor, remove that mediocre supervisor so the employee can spread their wings and fly as high as they can. Okay? If you, number two, make sure the stars move around teams so they can teach others how to become a star. Do not keep the star in a little corner, hiding from everybody else. Expose the star to other employees. If you're dealing with financial circumstances, do not reduce the resources you give to your stars, because the stars will leave and then your financial problems will get worse. Keep the resources with the stars. That's your only saving grace, so you will come back from the financial challenges. Make sure the deals you make with your stars, ideals means idiosyncratic deals, meaning you give the stars preferential pay, preferential treatment, but those ideals need to be public, meaning if I become a star, I get those goodies as well. The goodies are not attached to the person. They are attached to the performance of the person. So, and they're not forever. They're contingent on your performance. Anybody, so for example, in real estate, if you sell a certain amount of real estate, you get the rewards. Whoever gets that level gets the rewards. It doesn't matter who the person is. Now, if you're a leader, you have to be ready to allocate the resources. So you have to have the resources line up. Because having a lot of stars is not a problem, because the stars are creating the revenue for you. But you have to be ready to distribute the revenue to the stars. You can also do what's called a stay interview. Many companies do an exit interview. When the person leaves, why did you leave? The star's like, I'm not going to tell you. I'm leaving because they're giving me a better deal, the other company, but I'm not going to tell you. It's too late. Stay interviews is when you do the performance review, you sit down with your stars and you ask them, is there anything I can do for you? You're doing great. How can I help you? Believe me, the star performers will not ask you for a helicopter. They will ask for more resources so they can do even better. Oh, can I get an assistant? Can I get a faster computer? Can I get a better office so I can spend more hours in my office? Can I get another coffee machine so I can stay up more hours? Star performers want to perform more. And what they will ask you will not be that expensive compared to the return. Okay? So make sure you conduct a stay interview with your stars. There's nothing wrong with being an average performer, okay? Abby Wambach, 184 goals in international matches, more than any player, male or female, in international matches. She said, I've never scored a goal without getting a pass from someone else. Okay? You need an army of average players. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay? Average is you're meeting expectations. Stars is a whole different level. Okay? A whole different level. There's nothing wrong with being a B player. That's what you're expected to do, where you're expected to be, and you need the B players because otherwise, Abby does not get a pass. She only scores the goal because she gets a pass from somebody else. Okay, there's nothing wrong with being an average performer. If you have incentives that are not based on performance, for example, they're based on tenure or how long you've been around, if there's very little pay dispersion, if you have homogeneity in the rewards, if everybody gets the same regardless of their performance, all those things will demotivate potential stars from becoming a star. That will lead to psychological withdrawal, meaning we've known psychological withdrawal for decades. It's called quiet quitting, cute term. It essentially means you're there, but not 100%. You're 80%. You're 70% at work. You're not giving it all. Okay? And eventually, because the stars will wait until the right opportunity shows up, then they will leave. But in the meantime, they will produce at 60, 70% what they could produce. Okay? So those are the things we learn in terms of implications for practice. So if we want to lead, recruit, produce, and retain and clone stars, we need to think about all these recommendations. If we want to win the war for talent, we need to follow these research-based recommendations. The articles are available there, and the videos are also available on that link. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Aguinis, for the insightful lecture. May I please invite you to take a seat on the stage? Meanwhile, may I also invite Ms. Ong to take a seat on stage as well? We will now be moving on to the discussion and Q&A segment, moderated by Ms. Jovin Ong. If you have any riveting questions for Professor Aguinis, you may still submit your questions via the QR code above. Ms. Ong, over to you.
Thank you. Before we dive into the Q&A, I thought I would love for us to get to know Prof. Aguinis a little bit more. So just wanted to ask you a couple of, questions, if you don't mind.
Uh-oh.
Just to lighten up a little bit. So the first one is, if you hadn't had pursued research, what do you think would be an alternative career for you? Football player? Or...
No, not football player, no. But I always wanted to travel around the world.
Okay.
So maybe travel agent.
Oh, okay.
I always wanted to get to know people from other cultures. I speak several languages. As I mentioned, I was born in Argentina. I grew up in New York. I lived in Spain. And I speak 5 languages fairly well. Unfortunately, I lived in Beijing for a couple of months and I tried Mandarin and hopeless. But I tried, and then Cantonese worse, but I tried. Yeah, just traveling around the world probably would have been my other profession.
Nice. So aside from Singapore, obviously, right, what is your favorite country?
It depends for what. It depends for what. For, I would say, hiking would be Switzerland. For cheese would be France.
Ooh, okay.
For wine, Spain.
Oh, Spanish wine. That's nice.
And it depends on what activity. What I like about Singapore is that you take the MTR or you take a bus and you switch countries in 10 minutes. Last night, I'm here with my wife and we ate Japanese food. Today, we had Cantonese lunch. The first meal was Singapore noodles. And of course, you have all the Western meals that you could possibly get, which we are avoiding by all means necessary.
Okay, nice. And just to kickstart today's Q&A, right? What actually first sparked your interest in studying or examining performance as well as the star performers?
Well, as I mentioned in the talk, when I was very young, I was collecting football cards, and I saw that, and then my PhD is in a field called industrial psychology. And industrial psychology is a combination of industrial engineering and psychology. It's studying systems of people from a quantitative perspective in organizations. So I was always interested in how people work together, how they can work well, how they don't work well, but from a very quantitative point of view. And one of my research areas is research methods. If you think about astronomy or biology, and you think about these fields, before major methodological advancements like the Jack Welch telescope or the Hubble telescope, people were looking at the sky with the naked eye. They didn't know the difference between a planet, star, satellite, Milky Way or not. And biology. What did biology know before the microscope? Viruses, bacteria. The Middle Ages, you had an infection. What was the cure? Bloodletting. Are you kidding me? You have an infection, you're weak, and they take blood to remove the bad humors from your body. So I became also interested in research methods because I think that management and business, they're very young fields. So I think we have to improve our measurement procedures. We need to improve the way we collect the data so we can learn what's really happening and what's not happening. So I think it's really, really important that we learn how to improve methods in business and management research.
Thank you. And just to kind of start with today's Q&A, maybe if we could get Prof yourself to share a little bit, how do you define a star performer in today's context, right? Beyond just output, what sort of attributes are we looking at? You mentioned a little bit about entrepreneurial, learning agility. What others do you look at?
I would say that a very simple way to describe the star is that they're better than the others. Okay, so it's not an absolute measure. Star performance are defined by the difference between them and the other workers. And it is very important to think about stars, again, as people who contribute to team success. It's not just only their individual statistics, but team success. So I mentioned that Jack Welch was a CEO who produced enormous wealth for the shareholders of GE, but also he was a CEO who produced more CEOs in other Fortune 500 companies. So I think it's very important to think about stars as creators of value, not just for their own individual benefit, but also for the benefit of everyone around them.
Thank you. And just following on that, we've got a question also from the floor. Are star performers always star performers?
No, because star performers are defined by what they do, not by who they are. And that's a problem that women are facing, as we found in some of our research, that because you're a woman, you're not seen as having what it takes to be a star. When you start defining stars based on what you do or the output of what you do, then we can hopefully minimize some biases about racial issues, ethnic issues, age, national origin, and many other attributes that are about who you are as a person. So the problem with this area of research is that many companies are not able to measure performance very well. If you don't measure performance well, it's easy to not see who the stars are and to make biased decisions. I studied a lot of workers in industries where performance is measured very well, like in sports. The criteria for success are very well known and everyone agrees on what they are. So it is very critical as a manager that you start with defining performance well and measuring performance well. A few years ago, I was giving a session, a workshop to executives of very large companies, CEO level. There was a president of a hospital. There was a president of a community college. And they were all complaining about performance problems in their organizations. And I said, how do you define performance? And they couldn't define it very well. And they couldn't define performance very well because the strategy for these organizations was not defined very well. If you don't know where the company is going, it's hard to define the performance of the individuals in the company, because performance should be aligned with the strategic direction of the firm. So they didn't have a performance problem, they had a leadership problem. So we have to be very careful in terms of how we define and then measure performance.
And on that note as well, how do you then motivate some of your average performers? Or, in other words, not your star performance, right? Because you do need, like what you mentioned, you do need sufficient average performers to help your star performers as well. So having defined that guidelines may potentially demotivate some of these average players. How then can you manage these average players?
Well, that's a great question. I would say that there are two sides to that, two aspects of that issue. Number one is, by definition, not everybody will be a star performer. Not everyone has the motivation to be a star, and not everyone has the abilities, the skills, and the experience to be a star. So there's nothing wrong with being an average performer. That is what is expected of you, and you need a lot of average performers. What's important is to give everyone the opportunity to be a star performer if they wish to do so. So it's equal opportunity, not equal output expected. So for example, if you offer training should be offered to everybody. Not everybody may take advantage of it. If you offer, for example, pay for performance, if you meet certain goals, you will get additional compensation. Not everybody will take advantage of that. And not everybody will want to do so. There are some people who will want to work 40, 45 hours a week. There will be others who want to work 70 hours a week. And that's perfectly okay. It's an individual choice. And no one should be punished for being an average performer, because that's what's expected of you.
Okay. Just something on that note as well, right? In terms of the performance management, how do you manage line manager biases? Because people tend to favor working with people that they can get along with, and this is one of the questions that's from the floor.
So performance management is one of the most broken things in businesses. And most managers get an email from HR at the end of the fiscal year or at the end of the cycle saying, you didn't complete your performance reviews, or due, like next week. And it's like, oh no, again, those performance reviews, and the manager's thinking, half my employees I don't even know. A quarter of them I know, but I don't know how well they're doing. The rating forms are a disaster. I don't even know what it means. I am so busy with my job, so you know what? I'm just going to give everyone a 5. Top score for everyone. People will not complain. HR will be off my back. And I move on to my real job. That is not performance management. That is torture. That is a waste of time. Okay? So what we need to think about is how we use performance management as a tool that managers can use to improve their teams, not as a waste of time. And I have to be perfectly honest, I do train a lot of HR people. The vast majority of HR professionals do not have an HR education. How many accountants don't have an accounting degree? How many nurses don't have a nursing degree? How many lawyers don't have a law degree? How many HR professionals don't have an HR degree? The vast majority of them. So many of them don't also have a business degree. So it is really important for our esteemed HR colleagues to learn, for example, what the company is doing. When I do work with HR directors, I ask them, when was the last time you talked to a customer? Internal and external. So there's a problem with the system of performance management, and HR needs to serve the role of an internal consultant. And if the performance management system is just a waste of time, we're not going to be able to improve it. Performance management should be a way for the supervisors to understand which employees may need help, which employees who are stars may be at risk of leaving, and I have to do a stay interview with them. Which employees I need to help before we have a crisis, because an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so performance management can be used as a strategic tool to explain to employees, I want you to do these things because these are aligned with the strategic goals of the firm. Speaking of firms and speaking of organizational change and organizational culture, if you do it right, performance management could be the most powerful tool for changing the culture of the organization, because you pay for the things that the top management team wants to get done. So if you're able to do that, some companies, for example, in their performance reviews, have the mission of the company printed at the top of the form, so that everything that you're rating in terms of performance is directly related, so we don't forget what we're all about. So performance management is really broken, and so the Performance Manager for Dummies book is trying to fix that situation.
So where do you, like just in your experience, where do you typically see the breakdown coming from?
It comes from, I think, starts with HR, that makes performance management a compliance exercise as opposed to a tool that will benefit the managers managing performance. So I think that's where the problem starts.
You mentioned a little bit about if you have the right performance management, it can create the right sort of culture as well. Just another flip side of that question, how do you avoid creating a very transactional, high-pressure culture while still differentiating performance?
So performance management systems have to be consistent with the culture of the company, with the culture of the industry. If you are creating a performance management system for an investment bank in Manhattan, New York, or in Singapore, that'll be very different from a system in a non-for-profit organization. Very, very different systems. Starting with, do you measure performance at the individual level or the team level? Do you put more emphasis on team performance or individual performance? Do you put more emphasis on results versus behaviors? How the job is done versus the output of the result of your work. So depending on the nature of the company, depending on the nature of the culture, you will have a very, very different system. And that's something that also HR should help with. And by the way, speaking of HR and AI, yes, many of the functions can be done by AI, but this is one of the things that cannot be done by AI. Matching the culture of the organization to the metrics in the performance management system. You have to have an intimate knowledge of the culture of the organization. So that's good news for people in HR who are naturally very nervous about AI.
Okay, we have a pretty interesting question. How much time do we have? Can I just... Okay. There is this question. Is there a ratio of stars to average employees to optimize performance? Because having all stars is not sustainable, right? So what is an optimal ratio in your...
Great question, and for those researchers in the room,
Yes.
we can work on that because I don't know. I don't know what is the best ratio. I think it will be more industry specific. It also depends on the resources you have, because let's not forget that you have more stars, you will need a lot more resources. They will produce more for you, but you have to have the resources to give to the stars. So that is a very good question. And of course, we have anecdotal information that sometimes having too many stars could be negative because the stars want to do things their way. And so sometimes when you have too many stars, they start arguing with each other, and you can have a lot of tension between too many stars. But let's not forget that when we talk about stars, we're not talking about prima donnas, because the definition of star is somebody who helps the enterprise, not just somebody who's thinking about themselves. But nevertheless, stars are stars because they do things their way, because they know better. They really do. And they show that in their results.
So on that, there is also another question on selfish managers, right? So how do you motivate, or how do you convince these selfish managers or mediocre managers to actually let their stars shine?
It will never happen. It will never happen. And they're so afraid that the star will steal their job every single day. Every single day. So that will be a leadership challenge. So when you think about talent management, you have to think about a system. It's like your body. Okay, if you have a very healthy heart but unhealthy lungs, your body is not going to function very well. If your lungs are healthy and your heart is healthy, but your kidneys are not healthy, your system will not be healthy. So think about talent management as an entire system. So you start recruiting. And then you select. So let's say the recruiting is great. You have a fantastic pool of candidates, but the selection is biased. You're not going to end up with good people. If the selection is not biased, it's great, but you didn't recruit a pool that is big enough. It doesn't matter how good your selection is. You will not end up with great people. So you have to have top-notch recruiting, top-notch selection, and then once they are in the company, you don't give them development opportunities, training opportunities, you will lose them, or they will stagnate. So recruiting great, selection great, development bad. And then compensation is another one. So performance management is another one. So you need to think about all these components. And it's so interesting because if you think about people in your company, payroll is probably between 80-90% of your annual operating budget, right? And how much time and effort do we put into that amount of money, which is 80-90% of our budget? Starting with the inventory, okay? If I ask the president of NTU how many buildings the organization have, they will give me right away the inventory. The real estate inventory, they have it. The IT inventory, you better believe it. There's an IT inventory. How about a people inventory? That's 80-90% of your annual operating budget. You don't have an inventory of your people. I mean, I'm not saying NTU. Most companies don't. That's it. That's the biggest ticket on your budget. You need to know where are the skills? Where are the skills? Where are the gaps? Okay. You have a fantastic dean. She actually told me what the gaps are. She gave me the time before the meeting. Oh, I have this. This I don't have. This I don't have. She has a talent inventory right here. Okay, super impressive. Super impressive. Okay, so you need to think about how much you're investing in your people. How much money goes into that? And you have. I mean, if you invest money in a certain stock, you click obsessively, refresh. Okay? What's happening with the people, which is you're putting most of your money there. You don't keep track of where your money's going. So a good performance management system is doing that for you. We also need to keep track of time.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Two questions relating to what you just shared, right? One would be from your research, right? What are some of the notable talent management programs or initiatives that can enable practitioners like us to nurture and motivate star performers? Because you mentioned that it's a whole chain, right? From recruitment to development to compensation. What are some of specific initiatives that you've seen that work?
I think that the companies that have more stars, they do better with people, really think about people as truly a critical asset. They really do. They don't just have a little note on the website. People are our number one asset. And then there's a financial challenge and they let 10% go. Those are not the companies who do well. I mentioned a couple. I mentioned Google. I mentioned Capital One. And it's so interesting when you think about the companies that return the biggest financial returns. They're usually the same companies that are on the best companies to work for in Fortune magazine. They treat their people really, really well. Okay? And I know that based on data, and I know that based on personal information. I have a nephew who worked for Google for many years. Free haircut on site, free food. Of course, he never left the office. Gym, we have a pickleball court, Zumba classes, Pilates, you name it. At MBS, you have all of that. So you treat your people really well. And you saw that video, family, okay? Not just a slogan, but you really treat people well. Guess what? They do the same for you. They do the same for you. So you put money and care into your top resource, and then it pays off. And we have plenty of data on that, okay? If you look at what happened during the pandemic, which are the companies that said, no matter what, we're not firing anyone. We will give people vacations, we will try, but we're not letting anyone go. What happens with the companies that engage in downsizing and they say, oh, we're not doing well, we're going to let 5% of the payroll go or 10% go. What happens is that everybody else is thinking, oh, I'll be next. So I'm starting to look. So the companies that do that not only lose those people, but the top performers leave. Who are the ones who stay? The ones who cannot leave. The ones who are not marketable. So you're thinking you're saving money by downsizing and letting 10% go. And then you can never return to that level of financial profitability because now then you're losing your top people. The ones who can go will go. And you're stuck with the people who are not that great because they're not as marketable. And that's the consequence of downsizing, when you do these kinds of downsizing. We learned that again and again. We learned it in the 80s in the financial crisis, and we learned that again during the COVID pandemic. And those same companies that create amazing returns for shareholders and also private companies that are very profitable, they're ranked among the top best companies to work for over and over again. You treat people well, and they will do good things for you. They will treat customers well. They will talk to others very positively about your own company, and creates a whole virtuous circle.
What about for companies that do not have the luxury of, huge resources or like a huge scale, right? For employees to be moving around or experience some of these initiatives that you mentioned.
So the issue of incentives and the issues of compensating people and you give them things so that they will give back, especially for the stars, you need to ask them. Ask them, what do you need? Because we have financial resources and we have non-financial resources. Now, we have to compensate people in their wallets and in their souls. Souls alone doesn't work. I fly United a lot, and I was, a few months ago, I was at the check-in counter and I see an employee who had a button, like employee of the month or something. I said, oh, congratulations. She looks at me, she says, I have 3 more of these at home. So she was being compensated in the soul and not so much on the wallet. So you need both. But when you ask people, they may say, you know what? I would love to work remotely twice a week. Or I would like to get more training, or I would like to get this or that. And maybe those things do not cost a lot of money. And maybe you can say, look, I cannot add pay to your base, but I can have a bonus, next quarter. So what are the things you can do? And the fact that you ask them, that alone means a lot. So it is really critical. We all like to be told that we are loved, that we're accepted, that we're valued. Even the top performers. You should see these artists who make hundreds of millions of dollars. They love the adulation of the masses, in spite of the amount of money. The athletes, you see that, okay? So it's very important that we let people know, we tell them that we appreciate what they do.
So you mentioned a little bit as well earlier on about recruiting some of these high performers, right? There is a question over here on how do you identify and groom stars before they can produce results or outcomes, especially for those that are late bloomers. So perhaps when you hire them, they may not be a star performer. So how do you then identify them along the course of work if they are not outrightly star performers at the beginning?
That's a great question, another great question. And we know based on research on talent management that there are 2 main factors that cause performance. One is abilities, skills, and experience, so knowing how to do the job. And the other one is motivation. You want to do the job. So you know how to do it well, and you want to do it well. The more junior people probably cannot show just yet that they know how to do the job. So you can put more emphasis on motivation. And there are ways to measure motivation. And you can also look at some of the abilities that they may have, not just the skills, because those are learned, but you can measure some of the abilities. So there are some things that you can measure that signal potential, because some of the more junior employees may not be able to demonstrate yet that they have what it takes. So if you know, for example, they have received the right training and you see their motivation, then those are indicators of future performance.
Okay. One last thing. What is one thing organizations should stop doing if they truly believe in managing star performers?
Stop allowing mediocre managers to continue to be promoted in the organization. And they go higher and higher and higher because they play political games and they talk to the right people instead of their performance and the leadership being the factor for why they are promoted. Bad managers cause so much damage. They make your stars leave. So the one thing I would say is if you're in the top management team, make sure, for example, at Dell Computers, they have a program called Tell Dell. They love these acronyms, fantastic. Tell Dell, which means no manager is promoted unless their direct reports give really high performance ratings of them. Like, not other managers, not their superiors, because bad managers kiss up to their superiors to be promoted. How their direct reports see them as leaders. So stop promoting bad people into leadership roles because they cause a tremendous amount of damage.
One last question.
I thought that was the last one.
Was it? Sorry. It just came to me, right?
We got this
'Cause it-
card up there that
Yeah.
we're out of time. Okay, we'll do one more.
One more.
We'll do one more.
You mentioned about the stay interviews, right?
Stay interviews,
Stay
yes.
interviews. How often do you think this should be conducted?
Performance management and being a good manager is not something you do once a year. It's not something you do only on a quarterly basis. Your job as a manager is to manage. And managing the performance of your team is critical. Every single day, you should be managing people. Every single day. Stay interviews don't have to happen in a formal setting. Many companies have performance rewards on the spot. For example, you see an employee talking to a customer. You see that the customer was upset. The employee was able to help the customer, and the customer walks away happily. You see that. You approach the employee and you say, I just saw you talk to the customer. The customer was upset. I saw you provide this solution to the customer. The customer walked away happy. So you describe the entire incident of good performance. You say, here's a $100 certificate for a restaurant. You did great, and I hope you will continue to do a great job for us in the future. Like on the spot, okay? So that's what managers should be doing every day. Your job as a manager is to manage the performance of your people. That should be done all the time on an ongoing basis.
Thank you. Okay, I guess we are out of time. Are we opening the Q&A to the floor now, or any further questions, or are we? Yep.
There's a question over there. Do we have an extra mic?
Do we have?
There's a mic coming down, yes.
Hello. When I look at your distribution,
Your name and your affiliation, please.
my name is Charlie Cherong Wong. I'm an academic director of a Master of Science in Financial Engineering at Nanyang Business School. Okay. You use the normal distribution as a benchmark to measure the talent distribution. I'm just curious, why you don't use the Pareto 80-20? That's just curious.
Why didn't you use what?
Pareto rule 80-20. Pareto.
Power law. Yeah, Pareto power law. Yeah.
Why don't you use that one as a benchmark?
Well, because there's this bell curve that is used all the time. And so the starting point was, is it true that that's reality? And then we did Pareto, but then we did log normal, exponential, and tried many kinds of different distributions. But that, you're asking a very good question. And the reason is that the initial point for that line of research is, why are we using the bell curve? Right? And it's almost one of these things that has become a myth and urban legend that some, including GE, Jack Welch, used the bell curve. He called it the vitality curve, because every year the top 10% will be fired. I call it the mortality curve. But so many companies use it, even business schools use it to grade.
No. Grading, we never use bell curve. We use a skill.
Skill distribution.
Yeah.
There you go, because that's reality. Yeah. So to answer your question is, we started with that because that was what most companies were using. Thank you very much. Great question.
Thank you. Any questions? Any last questions? Do we still have one more? Right? No.
Okay, if not, can we give the both of them a round of applause?
Thank you. Thank you so much. So with that, I think we've come to the end of the Q&A. Thank you, Prof. Aguinis. I think today we've learned a lot. As future researchers, practitioners, and leaders as well, I think an important question for us to reflect is not just how do we identify or reward star performers, but also what kind of culture and organizational environment that we want to create, right, as well, before we could apply some of this performance management frameworks or tools into our day-to-day HR operations. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for your thoughtful questions, and a special thank you again to both Professor Aguinis and Ms Ong for the engaging discussion. We would like to take a moment to express our appreciation to our esteemed speaker, Professor Aguinis. May I invite Dean Junyang to the stage to present the token of appreciation.
So actually, Herman was my former Indiana colleague. So when you're talking about some people spend time in Indiana, that's about me. So I'm very happy to host him right here. And other than that, actually, my own research is on performance management. So actually, I study CEOs. Around the time you do the research, I have a theory paper. It's called Economics of Super Managers. Is a review of financial studies. So there we document exactly what you find there. So if the business is scalable, so if you're marginally more talented than the next in line, you can make the company a lot more profitable, so you deserve much bigger pay. So that's essentially parallel to your research in the finance field. There are theoretical studies. There are several papers I'm happy to share, but I'm so happy to see that you're comparing with the benchmark of bell curve. Bell curve is still used in many places, including some universities somewhere in the world. So I hope we will have the opportunity to invite you back, perhaps to train some CHROs, Chief Human Resource Officers, and maybe some board members, perhaps some board of trustee members, so they can learn what's the best way to motivate and to develop talents. I know this is on recording, so hopefully we're not in trouble, but this is fantastic.
That was her middle name.
This is fantastic research. We try our best to motivate everybody. I study signing bonus. I study retention bonus. I know the dispersion helps. We try to attract the top talent. We want to bring up the entire team, not only the ones we got from outside. We also have many colleagues from inside. They are also very talented. How can we use the superstars to build a team that is at the highest quality? That's a true challenge for all the managers, for all the team members, for everybody in this room. So I think this is super useful. Thank you again so much for bringing such a wonderful lecture here. Thank you.
We invite the both of them to the center of the stage to receive the token of appreciation.
Oh, beautiful.
Our dean is now presenting the token of appreciation. Now may I invite Ms Ong,
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Ms Ong to receive the token of appreciation as well. Want to go on? Now, we will also invite Professor Aguinis as well as Prof. Sadat to get on stage for commemorative group photo as well. This way. Yeah, you can just
Hold it.
hold on to it. Yeah.
Okay.
Ms. Ong as well. Yeah, for the group photo.
Marilyn and Ross
Yes.
from the division. Yes. Come on, please. Malden, where's Malden? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, professors, for the informative sharing and Q&A segment with many valuable takeaways. If you have enjoyed today's session, we warmly invite you to join us for the upcoming events. We have the Eminent Scholar Lecture, hosted by the New Global Institute of Finance, Technology and Society. We also have the MBS ECGI PRI Public Lecture Series on Sustainable Business. If you guys are keen, please kindly scan the QR code to register as well. Lastly, to all our attendees, both in person and online, we hope you found tonight's discussion fruitful. Before you head off, we have a small request to complete a short survey using the QR code shown above. And this will help us with planning of future events. And with that, we conclude tonight's event. A big thank you to our Professor Herman Aguinis, Ms Jovin Ong, Dean, and everyone who have made this event possible. Have a great evening ahead and to the next time. Thank you.